see.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm Katie Culver. I'm the director of the School of Journalism and Mass Communication. Wow, mood lighting. Wow. I'm also the James E. Burgess Chair in Journalism Ethics and the director of the Center for Journalism Ethics. Try fitting that on a business card. So I am delighted to welcome you here tonight in pretty calm time where nothing's really happening in regard to elections. So a few thank yous to start out. Thank you to the student fellows in the Center for Journalism Ethics, and especially the uber talented Krista Eastman, without whom none of this ever happens. Yay. All right, come on. Round of applause for Krista. She doesn't like it when I do that, and yet I do that anyway. I'd also like to thank the advisory board for the Center for Journalism Ethics and the Burgess family who make events like this possible. We are deeply, deeply grateful to all of them. Speaking of our board of advisors, I am delighted to introduce you first to Mike Gousha, who serves as a senior advisor in law and public policy at Marquette University Law School. That little institution just down I-94 from here that we occasionally compete against. An award-winning journalist, Mike served as Distinguished Fellow in Law and Public Policy from 2007 to 2021. He helped lead efforts to create the law school's Lubar Center for Public Policy Research and Civic Education. If you were like Katie Bartson, my maiden name, and you grew up in Milwaukee, you grew up watching Mike Gousha as one of the most talented, informative, and ethical journalists in that wonderful town that we both love to this day. Mike is a multiple award-winning journalist, but most importantly, a really, really good guy. Mike is in conversation tonight with Jonathan Martin, also known affectionately to the podcasting and pundit world as J-Mart. Jonathan is the politics bureau chief and senior political columnist at POLITICO, where he writes a reported column. Students in the audience, please pay attention. He doesn't just write a column, he writes a reported column. That's a really important word. Before starting that column in 2022, Jonathan was the national political correspondent for the New York Times. He's covered elections in all 50 states. He served as the publication's top political reporter for nearly a decade. He's also the co-author of This Will Not Pass: Trump, Biden, and the Battle for America's Future. I'm truly looking forward to this conversation tonight, and I hope you'll all join me in a round of applause to welcome both Mike and J-Mart.
Thanks very much, Katie, and thank you to all of you who turned out tonight. It's great to be here with all of you. Jonathan and I decided we might kind of break this into three parts. We'll spend the first part of our conversation talking about the the state of the race, what's happening in the presidential contest and the contest for control of the Senate and the House. Then we'll segue to talk about some of the unique challenges of covering politics in 2024, which Jonathan knows something about. And then we'll open it up for questions at the end of the night. So if you have questions that are on your mind or things that you'd like to follow up on when you hear Jonathan's comments, we'll be glad to call on you and have that discussion. So probably about 90 minutes in all. So we settle in and we'll have I think, a really interesting conversation. First of all, the easy stuff for Jonathan. How have you liked your stay in Madison so far for this week at the J School?
I knew it was going to be a fun week because here we are, you're in Madison in October of a presidential year, also happens to have a marquee Senate race. So I was really looking forward to it. Then I looked at the forecast last week, and I said, it's going to be 75 degrees in Madison that week. I got to change.
It's always 75
I got to change my
Madison, yeah.
And this is pretty cool. And then I get here, and I go to grab a quick bite yesterday at the State Street Brats, and there's Will Ferrell right there. And so I'm like, could this get any cooler? And I want you guys to know, the budding journalist in the room, I got the story. I carefully, delicately, and politely approached him and said hello to he and his wife and his son and chatted for a bit. And my wife was proud of me and shocked at the same time when I told her I did not ask for a picture and there was no selfie taken. But he couldn't have been nicer. And his son's looking at UW. And by the time I left lunch, I think about 70 or 80 kids were forming out there trying to get pictures of Will Ferrell. And I realized I had firmly become middle-aged when the kid said to me, "That's Will Ferrell, the guy from Elf." And I said, "Elf? You mean the guy from SNL?" I said, "What's that?" I said, "I don't know." So it's been a lot of fun being here, and I'm thrilled. Thank you, Katie, for having me, and Mike, thanks for doing this today.
Yeah, glad to do it. Looking forward to it. So I thought we'd get right into it and talk about the state of the presidential contest. We've got 2 weeks to go. Former President Obama was in Madison today, along with the vice presidential candidate, Tim Walz. Give me your sense, based on your travels, the conversations you have, and the people at Politico. What's your take on where we are today?
I think it's going to be an extraordinarily competitive election. I'd be surprised if we knew the result the day after, let alone the night of. I think we're going to be counting votes for a bit. As you guys know, or some of you know, in some states, you simply can't start counting the early ballots, the early votes, until election night itself, after the polls close. So I think we're in for a long count here. If we do have a decision on election night, I think that would be good news for Trump. I'd be surprised if we had one that fast. Look, Harris's campaign knows that this is an extraordinarily competitive race, and this is a margins game. And you know, they are data driven, and they're trying to find a way that they can win by a point or two at the very most, but in some cases less than a point, you know, across 3 states, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Yes, they're still competing in Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona, and Nevada, but she's really relying on the blue wall. Trump's running a very different kind of campaign. It's much more of a shotgun blast than a rifle. He's, you know, obviously Trumpian in his lack of discipline and his incontinence. He says whatever's on his mind and makes news every day because of it. And his strategy is much more macro. Okay, he's trying to win the election by basically saying, you had it better under me. The economy is bad, or it was bad. Inflation was too high. The border was out of control. And Biden's unpopular, and she gets you 4 more years of Biden. It's a pretty straightforward case, right?
Is he doing a good job of making it, or is he seem to be off on tangent after tangent after tangent?
The only look, let's be brutally honest. This should be a good Republican year, okay? The atmospherics for 2024, unpopular incumbent in the White House, country thinks things are heading in the wrong direction, decades high inflation. That adds up to a good year for the party out of power. I mean, you don't have to be a poli-sci PhD here at UW to know that, right? What makes it competitive are 2 major issues. Trump is Trump. He's uniquely alienating for over half the country, and people view him with disdain and are never going to vote for him no matter what happens and what he says or does. Secondly, the Dobbs decision that ended Roe versus Wade in June of 2022 has powered Democrats in a series of states and ballot measures and given them a potent offensive weapon in a year where they don't really have a lot. And so I think those two issues have kept this race competitive. Now, we can talk about the summer that was here in a minute if you want, but it's been a difficult year for Democrats, obviously, and the issue set and the atmospherics don't favor them. What keeps them in the game is Trump's incredible lack of discipline. I joked with friends about this. If Donald Trump was trying to lose the race, would he be doing anything differently than what he says and does on a day-to-day basis? And I think the answer, I don't think the answer is yes. She, on the other hand, runs a much more disciplined, cautious campaign. I think too cautious. We can talk more about that if you want. But you couldn't have more different candidates with more profoundly differing strategies. And the two parties, and you'll appreciate that because having covered politics, the two parties have really changed their stripes. When we were coming up in politics, the Democrats were the patchwork, messy, disorganized, undisciplined, ungainly kind of coalition, and the Republicans were the buttoned down, hierarchical, command and control, ruthless, data-driven party, right? And that has flipped, and the Republicans have become the pirate ship, and Democrats have become the British Royal Navy. And it used to be the opposite. And now, structurally, they're just so different now. And which is why I think Biden got pushed off of the ticket, because his party is now so damn disciplined and organized and cold-eyed. They want to win elections. And they don't care whatever it takes, they're going to win, even if that means pushing their incumbent president out to sea the summer before his reelection.
You've covered politics a long time. Were you surprised that Biden stepped away?
I was, yeah, I was. In part because he's an incumbent president the summer before his reelection, and he's running a reelection campaign. I mean, when LBJ withdrew, it was March of '68, and that's a different time. The primary was barely getting going at that point. And there was a pressing issue, the Vietnam War, and he was unpopular because of that. With Biden, there was some issue, but the larger issue was you're 81 going on 82, and you look every bit of it, and you had a debate that you can't get back into the can, that debate lives forever, and so you have no choice. It still surprised me because Biden's a proud guy, and Biden wanted to be president for so damn long, and the fact that he walked away from it, I thought was very striking. Biden deep down, I think, feared and fears being perceived by history as the parentheses between Obama and Trump. That's really wounding for him that he be a one-term president, because he knows history will look at him differently, and he desperately wanted to be a two-term, more consequential president who had a bigger legacy than just being the guy between Obama and Trump. And I think that pains him to this day, and there's a reason why he has not spoken to Nancy Pelosi since June. And by the way, she has tried to get him on the phone. I know this for a fact. He won't take the call. Blames her still.
I wanted to ask you about
Tough business.
Tough business. So Harris is the data person now.
Yes.
In this race, the Democrats are the
Absolutely,
data people. They're
yes.
crunching numbers.
I mean,
so what are they looking at, Jonathan, right now in these last 2 weeks?
Yeah.
Who are the people they're targeting right now?
If you said to the Harris campaign, what do you guys have to do in the drift list? In fact, what do you have to do in La Crosse proper, the city of La Crosse? I mean, they could tell you down to the precinct the number that they want to hit in La Crosse, right? Because that's the nature of their campaign in this era. It's that sophisticated. So, look, that said, you still have to have a message and you have to have persuasion. It's not all mobilization. The best campaigns do persuasion and mobilization. And you got to do both. And you can't just win on mobilization. You got to persuade some voters that haven't decided yet. Or voters that frankly are torn between, do I leave the top line blank? Do I write somebody in? Or do I grudgingly pull the lever for Harris, even though she's too liberal for me? And I think those voters that I just mentioned who are weighing those three options, they're not going to vote for Trump. but they're weighing those three options, are precisely the reason why she's flying around on a plane with Liz Cheney yesterday, going to 3 battleground states, including here in Wisconsin, because they know they've got to do more to reel those folks in. It's not enough to write in Paul Ryan or Ronald Reagan. It's not enough to skip the top line. You got to vote Harris. And I think that they're trying to get those folks. I just think, and I wrote this today, that I don't understand why she won't do more to assure those voters that she'll govern from the center, that she'll work across party lines to compromise and get stuff done next year, because that's what those voters want to hear. They don't want Trump back, but they don't want to give the store away to someone that's going to be a California liberal.
So you're, in your own little way, Jonathan, are trying to push her to the center, and
not just me, by the way.
yeah, that's what I was going to ask you.
Yeah.
There are other people who are saying this to
Absolutely.
her?
I'm talking to people literally every day. I look at my phone before I went on here. I had 20 more texts from the piece that I wrote today because I'd stir the pot a little bit more. And yeah, there's a lot of Democrats and there's former Republicans who desperately want Trump to lose. They're panicked for the country. They know what Trump represents, and they don't want this back, for personal, for partisan, and for patriotic reasons, all three. And they don't understand why Harris isn't doing more to try to reach folks that are still undecided. And they are frustrated with where the campaign is, and they believe the campaign's plateaued. Great convention, really, really strong first debate. That's the Kamala Harris story. I've covered her for 10 years. When she has a big moment and she can prep, we saw this in the Senate. She did those Judiciary Committee hearings, man alive. She grilled Brett Kavanaugh and Bill Barr and all those guys, Jeff Sessions, and they didn't know what hit them, right? Same with the debate, same with the convention. But she's not as strong off the cuff. She's not as strong as extemporaneous politician. And to be fair, that's difficult, right? And I think it's challenging because Democrats have had two modern presidents in Barack Obama and Bill Clinton, who were both generational talents on policy, politics, and in terms of campaigning. And it's a high bar to compare her to them, but that's the bar because those are the two most recent two-term Democratic presidents, right? And the truth is that she is having a hard time reaching that level day to day, and the campaign now reflects that. It's also true that she's carrying the baggage of an unpopular incumbent president who's been good to her, who she doesn't want to break from, who she doesn't want to scorn publicly. And at the same time, she has to tell voters that she's going to be different from him. That's a hell of a line to walk. Every VP has faced this challenge. There's a reason why George H.W. Bush is the only modern sitting vice president who won an election to succeed the sitting president. It's very tough to pull off because you own the previous president's baggage.
How do you think Tim Walz has done?
I think Walz has been something of a non-story because vice presidents don't matter that much until they hurt. My theory on VPs or running mates is that they only matter when they hurt. And the obvious example that I've covered was Sarah Palin, right? Somebody who that mattered because it sowed doubts about McCain. And so it hurt McCain. I think that they really don't matter that much. I think that they mattered a tiny bit before Trump, and they matter even less in the Trump era. Politics is about Donald Trump, okay? 9 years now, of which side are you on? Are you for or against him? That's the dominant question of our era. This is the age of Trump, like it or not. And I think whether or not Walz had a good rally in wherever, or J.D. Vance did this or that, at the margins it matters, but this is about Trump, you know?
One quick question about polls.
Please.
And I'll frame it this way. I mean, in 2016 and 2020, pollsters missed on the what have sometimes been characterized as the shy Trump voter. Perhaps not as shy in 2024.
Less shy now,
but also perhaps not anxious to talk to a pollster.
Exactly.
So my question is, could we be surprised on Election Day that maybe the polls are not capturing youth turnout? Maybe they're not capturing.
Absolutely.
How much?
We have never known as little as we know today about a modern election. We don't know what's going to happen. And anybody that tells you that they have a great sense, they're making it up. We don't know. I live and breathe this stuff. And people I talk to don't know what's going to happen. There's real suspense. The polling is flawed. They've tried to fix it after 16 and 20 when Trump outran his polling. You guys saw the surveys in Wisconsin in 20. Trump was going to win here by convincingly. Didn't happen. He won narrowly. I'm sorry, Biden won narrowly here. And they've tried to adjust the samples to account for more Trump voters because what's happened is a lot of the Republican Party simply does not engage in polling. They don't want to tell the pollster how they feel. And you have to try to account for that in the modeling, and you're doing some guesswork when you do that. But to your point, are they still undercounting Trump supporters? Is there still a shy Trump supporter who won't take a survey? Or are we now underestimating the shy Harris voter? There was a reason why Liz Cheney yesterday, not here, but at the stop in Michigan, said, don't forget, you can vote for Kamala Harris and nobody will ever have to know how you voted. And millions of Republicans are going to do just that. I mean, that is like poli-sci permission structure 101, right? And the Harris campaign blasted that on social media immediately. That is aimed at so many Republican women around the country who don't want to contradict their husband's vote, but who don't like Donald Trump, and they're struggling with this. My friend and colleague Dan Balls at the Washington Post is a name some of you guys might know because his son John teaches here in Madison, and Dan's a great friend and mentor and the gold standard of political journalism in America today. And Dan did this fantastic piece over the weekend that all of you should read. It was like a travel log from his driving around Pennsylvania and talking to different kinds of voters in Pennsylvania. And he had this memorable anecdote that I thought of when I saw Liz Cheney's comments yesterday, which was there's a woman in Pennsylvania who has been leaving notes in the women's bathroom of wherever she is in public that reminds women that nobody knows who you voted for. It's a secret ballot. And that to me was such a reveal. So I think if we have a surprise on Election Day and Harris wins with some ease, I think it'll be in large part because there was a shy Harris vote and people were fed up with Trump and just didn't want to say it out loud.
Wisconsin, so your take on this state? I mean,
the Kurds are fantastic. The bratwurst, white and red, was very nice. And the spotted cow tastes better here. It just does, you know. Wisconsin, where are we at? Well, ground zero. First of all, can I just say, I have loved talking to the students. I've been to a half dozen classes so far, going to more tomorrow. And I've had the biggest thrill in getting to know some kids and doing questions. And one of the things I've asked most of the classes that I've been in is, are you registered to vote, A, and then B, if so, registered to vote here in Wisconsin. And you know, the great part about the University of Wisconsin, as all of you guys know, is that you have a lot of kids from Wisconsin, but there's always been a contingent of kids from the two coasts here as well. And it's the charm of this great school is that the dairy farmer's kid mixes with the banker's kid from Scarsdale, right? It's sort of the charm of Wisconsin, right? And that's why the school is so damn cool. And I asked these kids, were you registered? All the hands shoot up.
Interesting. That
they're registered here. And it makes sense when you walk down State Street because there are all these booths set up registering kids. And it's really fascinating to see the machinery here in Madison underway. So clearly, and I told these kids, I say no pressure, but at 19, 20 years old, you have in your hands the fate of the world. And they're laughing at first. And I said, no, I'm serious. Here's why. Kamala Harris cannot win the presidency, almost certainly, if she loses Wisconsin. And the only way that she's going to carry Wisconsin is if she has a big turnout in Dane and runs up the score here. Because as Craig Gilbert, our friend at the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, has expertly explained, the Democratic path to victory statewide in the last decade flows entirely from the explosion of votes and Democratic votes in Dane County. So that's a long way of answering your question. Can Harris get the turnout and the margin out of Dane and Milwaukee? And I think that's the whole ballgame. Can she pull that off? If she can win narrowly here. But boy, it's going to be narrow because I think in a lot of the smaller cities, places like Oshkosh, La Crosse, Eau Claire, Green Bay, I think it's going to be hard for her to reach the Biden number, let alone exceed the Biden number.
Yeah, the encouraging thing, I think, for Democrats in the state, when they look at La Crosse and Eau Claire, they've seen success in recent elections there, and they see Democrats kind of on the rise in those communities, college towns again, which is interesting.
If you can juice the college vote, that's right.
Yeah,
exactly
so if she
right.
can juice that, there may be possibilities there.
That's it.
So I asked you about the Wisconsin race. You think that will be right down to the wire again?
I do. And it's hard to see either candidate pulling out. I mean, they both need Wisconsin, and it's so close. I mean, it's a 50 state. I mean, it is as close as any state in America to the decisive state because it is so right down the middle. You know, the Jill Stein thing doesn't seem to be taking off here. Earlier in the year, I was curious about that because I thought the Palestinian issue may prompt some of the students and the grad students, especially here, to pull a protest lever for Jill Stein. I don't pick much of it up, though, which I think is important for Harris to keep her coalition. Look, Democrats have a challenge. The blessing and curse of Trump has been that he has conferred on the party an extraordinary but at the same time precarious coalition that effectively is like a European-style coalition government. Democrats now effectively have three parties under the same banner. They have the actual socialists, which if they were overseas would be the socialists, Bernie and AOC. They have the traditional Clinton-Obama crowd, left of center, capitalist, but certainly progressive. And then they have a smaller faction of former Republicans and moderates and independents who just can't stomach Trump for a variety of reasons. You know, in Europe, we'd call that a coalition government, right? It's all under one banner here, and it's given Democrats the House, the Senate, and the White House, and a ton of governorships. So it's been a blessing. The curse is it's precarious. And so if you have a war in the Middle East and you upset a large faction of Arab Americans, well, Michigan gets more complicated, right? And so, look, I think that she's kept the lid on here in Madison on the left. The Stein thing doesn't seem to be taking off, which is important. But, you know, can she get her number out of Milwaukee? Younger black men have been a challenge. Yep. Does that happen? And then what is she able to match Biden's number in the rest of the state? The Republicans in Washington are more confident that they can beat Tammy Baldwin than they have ever been in my career. They think this is going to be a really close race.
Why do they believe that?
Because they believe that the Senate race is going to turn on the presidential, and the Republicans are so confident that Trump's going to roll. It's fascinating. The Democrats are literally panicked day in, day out. They're desperately worried that Trump is going to pull this thing out, and they're nervous about her candidacy, and I think for good reason. I've written it myself. The Republicans are so cocksure, it's just incredible that they're just, you know, they're convinced that Trump is this powerful force and that she can't touch him, and that Trump will bring along some senators with him, and that he wins here by 1.5, 2 points statewide. He pulls Hovde by 0.5 point. That's the theory.
That's an interesting theory.
That's the theory.
Generally speaking, the Senate, most people seem to think that's going to be in Republican hands after
Yes,
Election Day.
that's my
share that?
I do. I mean, I think, in fact, I think that's one of the reasons why Kamala Harris would be wise to lean into compromise, because it's going to be the order of the day next year, if she likes it or not. She would be. This is incredible. If you want to impress somebody at a party or on State Street tonight, you'll kill with this line. You'll really impress everybody. I promise you, kids. She would be the first Democrat to come to the White House as a new president who did not have majorities in both chambers of Congress since Grover Cleveland's first administration in 1872. Every modern Democrat began with their personnel and their agenda getting off the ground, their cabinet appointed first 100 days, because they had majorities in both chambers. So she almost certainly, if she wins, will come into a divided government with the Republicans controlling the Senate. So she's going to have to cut deals and organize. She's going to, now, is it 51 or 54? You know, is a question, which could make a lot of difference. But I think it's almost certain that the Democrats are going to lose the Senate next year, and she's going to have to compromise. And she's going to have to cut deals to avoid a tax increase when the Trump tax cuts expire, to avoid the debt ceiling from not being raised, and to simply fund the government.
It'd be very tough to carry out campaign promises with a Republican
Yeah,
Senate.
which is why her promises today on this and that, her 2025 agenda is going to be working with the Senate Republicans to keep the government open, raise the debt ceiling, and avoid a massive tax increase in every American. That's the agenda next year. And again, I come back to lean into that and embrace the compromise and embrace working across party lines to end the food fight, because Americans are sick of it. I mean, the best line is we're going to stop this crazy fighting and drain the toxicity of the system. The reason why so many Americans, you know, normie voters, love that Walz-Vance debate is because it was just two adults up there having a normal debate. I was like, oh my God, I remember this from the before times. Yeah. it's not two old folks yelling at each other. Yeah, I remember these days,
Quick question about the House.
Yeah. I think it hinges on the presidential. I think of the three bets right now, and I'm not encouraging any of you guys to go on DraftKings tonight, by the way. It's not an encouragement to wage any money. But if you were, I think of the three, House, Senate, and White House, the safest bet by far is the Senate. And the White House is too close to call, and I think the House will hinge on the presidential. If Trump finds a way to surge in the final few days and wins convincingly and cracks 300 electoral votes, I think that he'll keep the House, and they may add a couple of seats. I think if Harris moves in the end, the Democrats will flip the House.
Let's talk a little bit about covering politics in 2024. I'm going to begin with a very basic question for you as someone who has done this for a number of
20 years, yeah.
Yeah. Do you find enjoyment in it today?
Depends on the day. I can't deny that there's days where the feelings of nostalgia are overwhelming. And when I pine for an earlier day, and I don't want to be totally rosy about what was, the older days were hardly perfect, but it's definitely hard to avoid nostalgia. But on balance, yeah, I really like it. Here's why. To me, it's the best possible job, and I have the best possible job in the profession that I love, because what I am able to do is tell the story of this country through the prism of government and politics. I'm not just covering campaigns. I'm not just writing about the latest poll in Wisconsin or Michigan. At its best, I think political journalism is explaining to readers who we are as a country, where we came from, where we are, where we're going, by telling about a place, explaining a place in a campaign in the context of that place and of the candidates running. Because that's the real burden on us, is to explain to people, to inform the public of why things are the way they are and the choices in front of them. And to me, I love people, I love traveling, I love food, you can probably tell, and I love everything about going to a community and just drinking in all of it. I mean, here we are, we're on the lake at Madison, we're in the basement, when I got lost coming here, and I'm wandering around, it's like, yes, I am in, like, the Rathskeller at, like, the, Union at UW on a gorgeous fall day. It doesn't get any better than this, right? And to me, that's a privilege. I've been to all 50 states covering politics, and I loved something about every one of them. Well, maybe not Jersey, but no, I'm kidding. Any folks from Jersey here? I'm kidding. I love Princeton. It's a lovely town. And so to me, it's a real treat because it does two things for me. It appeals to two instincts I have. I love sports. I love competition. And the competitive side of me that wants to get the story first. You know this feeling. Yeah. There is no better high than knowing something that nobody else knows and having that story first. You know what I'm talking about. When you beat the other guy, it's a powerful thing when you have information that the world doesn't know yet. That's incredible. And so the competition of getting it first, getting it right, obviously, is a really neat part that appeals to the sort of competitive side of me. The other side of me, which is a little bit wonkier, which is curious about the how and the why of politics, history, and Americana, I can scratch that itch too, and I can go into places and, like to dig into the backstory of like the Driftless region and why is this part of Wisconsin that held on for so long and voted for John Kerry as late as 2004. Why is that part of this state, part of this country, Catholic, Western Wisconsin along the Mississippi River, Fish Fry Fridays at the Knights of Columbus, the whole 9 yards. Why has that part of this state in this country changed its political stripes? That, to me, is endlessly interesting, and I want to know the answer to that question, and I want to convey that to everybody else.
So you touched on this earlier, but I want to talk about the challenge of covering someone like Donald Trump. And, he's been on the national scene
name rings a bell,
as a candidate for 10 years.
Red tie,
or
orange
more.
hair,
Yeah. So he has been out there, but I heard you on a podcast the other day, and you were saying that the media still hasn't figured out how to cover him.
We're almost 10 years into the era of Trump, and we have not figured out how to cover Trump. He defies the traditional standards of post-World War II American journalism. You're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't. And let me explain that. If you cover Trump for what he is, it's a aberrant figure, demagogic figure, somebody who has no grounding in the Constitution or the history of the country, and somebody who has no regard for the truth. Not my opinion, though. I'm sorry, those are facts. They are, and I can back them all up. If you cover him for what he is, as a deeply aberrant figure who's a massive departure from the post-World War II political traditions in this country, at least as somebody who's gotten as far as he has, and you write with like Pearl Harbor-sized fonts every day covering his conduct in screaming headlines and like, heavy breathing language in your lead of your story, or do the similar version on television or radio, then you're honest about who he is and you cover him for what he is, but you alienate a third or more of the country because they don't understand why you're covering him this way, and they think that you're biased or you have Trump derangement syndrome, and you feed into what he wants, which is increasing cynicism about institutions in this country, including the press, and sowing more mistrust in us. And so it's a win for him if you cover him for what he actually is, and you create challenges as an institution, as journalists, because it's hard to do 9/11 Pearl Harbor style coverage for 9 years of the biggest political figure in the country, just for practical reasons, right? If you don't cover him for what he is, if you grade him on a curve, if you try to sort of like force him into like the like normalator blender of like AP style, candidate X said Y, Tuesday candidate Y said X, and they traded barbs back and forth, and the spokesman, 800 words, hit send, right? If you do that and you cover him and try to pretend like he's normal, you're doing a disservice to your readers, and you're not being honest about who he is. And that violates the sort of oath we have effectively of telling the truth and being honest with readers. So you tell me what's the answer. How do you cover it? That's why. And then there's also just the simple fact of his output. He says and does so many provocative, offensive, outlandish, extraordinary things that you simply can't cover them all, because once you start covering one thing, he's doing 3 or 4 more. And I'm reminded, and the folks here in this room who were born before 1980 will appreciate this, of the episode in I Love Lucy in which she's at the chocolate factory and she's trying to keep all the chocolates on the conveyor belt from like, falling down. She's like putting them everywhere in her. That's Trump. It's like we're trying to do this, and it's just not possible. For the students in the room, I Love Lucy. See me after. I'll give you the whole backstory.
I know.
Yeah.
Some expression.
Yeah.
It's like the Will Ferrell thing.
Exactly.
SNL? What?
Alf,
I don't
yeah.
know what that is.
Yeah.
So what can you do?
So I think the way to cover him is to be straightforward and honest about who he is and describe him in the language that I just did, which as a journalist is not easy to say, even though I've been a columnist now for a couple of years. It's still hard to say that and to describe him in the way I did because, oh my, that's so loaded. But it's not loaded because it's a fact. That's who he is. And I'm sorry, it's not biased to say that.
Do enough media outlets do
No,
that?
and I wish there was more. You look at these rallies and the coverage of some of these rallies, and I don't mean like the big papers. I'm talking about like, other outlets. They try so hard to cover him as a normal candidate, and it's like you're just not being honest about who he is and how he's conducting himself if you do that. And that's the challenge these institutions have is, if you're honest about him, then you run the risk of alienating some of your audience, right? And so let's say you're in a red state and you work for the AP or a local television affiliate and he comes to your state, you cover him for what he is, you get people furious, calling into the station, sending angry emails. And look, we're not charities, right? Media is for profit with some exceptions. We got to make money to survive. And so this is not something that we can take lightly because, as you guys may have noticed, the economic model for our industry isn't great right now. So it's a challenge financially too, right?
So conservatives,
Yes.
when you describe Donald Trump as the way you just
Yes.
did, They don't like that.
They
They say
hate it.
that's media bias, but increasingly,
Yes.
the blowback members of the media are getting
yeah.
is coming from the left.
Yeah, and
They're
that
sane washing.
Yeah, the
what
sane
Donald
washing
Trump has to
thing,
say.
right? Well, and that's what I was saying. I call it grading on a curve, but sure.
Yeah.
Look. When I was first a journalist, the attacks were always from the right, and it was always you guys are too biased toward the left. And that was when this was more ideological. And by the way, this is the big difference with Trump. It's all personality driven now. It's not ideology. It's like there's no Republicans who are saying you aren't giving a fair enough shot to his proposal for 120% tariff on French cheese. I mean, come on. It's like nobody litigating that, right? There's nobody saying like you're in the tank for like the French cheese industry or whatever, right? No, they don't even bother, litigating the policy because half of his policies are made up off the cuff, and he's forgotten it the next day, and because also it's not even conservative, right? My favorite was he was going to subsidize IVF, and that was then topped by 10% cap on credit card interest. It's like, imagine the reaction like the Wall Street Journal when they heard that like the nominee for Republican wanted to cap credit card interest. Talk about a market intervention, right? Anyways. So, no, it's always you're mean to Trump, but not on policy. Back in the day, it was you're liberal biased on policy. Now the criticism is on the right, it's you're mean to Trump and you hate Trump and you're unfair to him. And on the left, it is even more strenuous. It's you're normalizing a man who is a threat to our country and you're not sounding the alarm sufficiently. And I think, I just told you, I feel like that we should cover him as he is. So like my sympathies lie more in being honest about who Trump is. The problem I have from the scolding on the left is that I feel like there's a bit of denialism on the part of some people in liberal circles. And to be totally candid, I think some of this doubles as therapy for them more than it actually is media criticism. If you want to tell yourself that America is going to come to see Donald Trump for the authoritarian he is, because the New York Times sub-headline on A14 was framed differently, I got bad news for you, okay? A third of America thinks the hurricane was bioengineered last week in North Carolina, okay? They're not moved by the subhead in the New York Times on page 814, all right? And so that bothers me when people say, if the Times lead or headline was different, you guys are enabling this. It's like we are so past the point in American life where that kind of stuff is what's shaping these voters. A third of the country believes in like RFK Jr. is some kind of like a medical seer, and like the hurricane was bioengineered and FEMA are stormtroopers. And you're telling me the issue is the New York Times headline? It's hard to stomach, right? I think you're not really grasping the severity of the issue at hand here. So I just have a hard time. I have a hard time with that critique. I agree with the foundation of it, that we ought to cover Trump for what he is, but you can't pin the country's curiosity or support or the appeal of Trump on the fact that a big elite paper, 90% of the readers are voting Democrat regardless, isn't being tough enough on him. I just think that's preposterous.
So we are overestimating the influence of the media, a term I know you don't care for.
It doesn't, what media?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, in 1974, the three national papers and the three networks and the wire services and the three news magazines. Kids, there was Time, Newsweek, and U.S. News, and they came out every week, and they were huge, setting the agenda. That mattered. There was gatekeeping. Yes, like the word came down from a handful of mostly men, unfortunately, in New York and D.C., and that set the agenda for the coverage of politics, culture, and everything else. Those days are so long gone. I mean, we have gone back to, and I think this is one of the great stories of our time, the post-World War II consensus in media, culture, and politics is over. There's nothing left that unifies Americans, with maybe the exception of the NFL, even though that's a challenge now too for a lot of reasons. Besides football and the NFL, what's the big, enduring, unifying American institution? The media, the culture, the politics has all changed, and we're not living in the Cronkite era post-World War II. We've gone back to an earlier era, which frankly was the rule, not the exception, for much of American history, which is a cacophonous, sectional, divisive and scattered and splintered culture and media. And people now get information of tons of different ways, and nobody's sort of listening to the same stuff at the same time. In these classes, I've been telling these students, you guys think of the Super Bowl and maybe a presidential debate. That's the only moment where everybody in this country is watching the same thing. Not everybody, but the bulk of Americans are watching the same thing. There was once a time where there was lots of those kinds of things, right? We're all having the same conversation, and that's gone now. And that's Trump has accelerated some of that division, but that's bigger than Trump. You know, that is a tectonic shift in American society.
How concerned are you? Obviously, you're concerned about it, but when you look at...
And politics, by the way, is now identity. It's
Yeah,
not like, you know, in 1872, speaking of Grover Cleveland, there were not a lot of voters who were saying, well, I'm curious about Cleveland's 5-point plan on the deficit, and I'm going to be checking out his white papers on that. No, you were voting for a Democrat or a Republican because your family fought on one side or the other in the Civil War, or your family emigrated from Ireland or Italy, or because you lived in the South or the West or the North. Politics was an outgrowth of your identity and who you were. It wasn't a preference. It wasn't a choice on your assessment of politician X or Y. Sorry.
We're living in interesting times.
Yeah.
It's always the wrong word, but the only one I could think of. And so I want to ask you about the role of Elon Musk with his platform.
Great question.
And what that means as we move forward in the election cycle.
Yeah.
He is increasingly spending money.
Yes.
He is
Quite literally, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and increasingly putting things out there, whether in public appearances
Right.
or on his platform, X,
Right.
Twitter, whatever you
Well,
want to call it.
yeah.
I mean, but how dangerous is that?
Well, first of all, what's forgotten in this story is that we used to have campaign finance laws in this country. They're being totally flouted, right? I mean, there's even bigger than campaign finance. I mean, he's pushing laws, period, now, offering $1 million to people in Pennsylvania. I had a student ask me a very important question in one of the classes I spoke to, and the student said, you know, what's your view of the role of celebrities in these campaigns? And they cited the example of Taylor Swift for Harris and Elon Musk for Trump. And I said, look, I think celebrities can matter at the margins, turning out votes, but Elon Musk is a different story. It's not like he's going to play a concert and they'll register some new voters and go to the polls, rah, rah, let's see your voter registration card, have a nice night. No, this is a different story. With Elon Musk, it's like he owns a major platform and he's using the platform to support the candidate of his preference. It's much closer to like a William Randolph Hearst, where you're controlling the medium and you're trying to affect events, in the case of Hearst, trying to perpetuate the Spanish-American War by doing yellow journalism on the Maine in Havana Bay. It's much closer to that than it is, you know, Springsteen playing down here at you know, State Street or wherever, the Kohl Center. And this is different. This is somebody who is trying to use a major, effectively media organization that he now runs. And this is why your question earlier about the media. What media?
I know.
Right? I mean, this billionaire guy who owns a car company and a rocket ship company bought what's effectively more influential than any media company in the world and is making it now reflect his politics.
Are we all complicit because we still post on it and still
This very
provide-
day I was on there. Don't tell anybody. Oh, no, guilty.
We were talking about it at the advisory
I
board
just
meeting, and
can't,
it's like
I just can't
still
stop.
grudgingly.
My favorite are the Democrats who are still on there, and in their handles it says, "Follow me on Blue Sky," or like, and you're posting like 10 times a day on Twitter. It's like, I'm not gonna follow you on Blue Sky or like Threads. You're still here, man. You know, it's like it is almost a narcotic of like, oh look, this is the last drink I'm gonna have. I mean, it's incredible, right? And they just can't help themselves. Here's why it's important for journalists. Because for us, it's the town square. It's the watering hole. It's where I can, when Charles Franklin at the other school down the road in Milwaukee has a new poll that comes out on Wisconsin, like I don't have to search the internet for that. I can find Charles Franklin, great handle on Twitter, at Polls and Votes, by the way. And I can find and see his new poll and click on it in 10 seconds. So for me, it's a convenience thing. It's a gathering place. And yeah, it's a way that I can push out my story or my view or like my like creeper picture of Will Ferrell. Actually, I have to say, I'm using Instagram more for personal stuff. I kind of like Instagram more for pictures and for like, because I can limit who follows me on there, and I kind of just do that for friends and family type stuff. I share my column on Instagram, like an Instagram story, but it doesn't have anywhere near the penetration as Twitter, obviously.
So on election night, Jonathan, what do we expect? Do we expect that with a relatively few number of votes counted, Donald Trump declares victory, and we begin who knows how long of challenges?
Well, this is what worries me, is I'm really troubled about a repeat of 2020. And we know that Trump is never going to concede defeat. I mean, he's Donald Trump. The entire conceit of Donald Trump's public identity is he's a winner. If the idea of Donald Trump is going to, like on election night or the next day, pick up the phone and say, Madam Vice President, congratulations. You know, I gave it the old college try. I came up just a little bit short, but I'm happy for you. Congratulations to you and Doug. You're going to have my prayers. I mean, give me a break, right? That ain't happening. He is never going to do that. He's never going to concede. He will deny he lost if he lost, and he's going to demand some kind of accountability, and it's really alarming. And I worry. I don't worry for people in D.C. or New York at media I worry for people who are in counties, who are running polling places, who are counting the ballots, who get these, prank calls and death threats. I worry about that, and I worry about somebody, getting radicalized and going after some of those folks. It really is alarming, and if she wins narrowly, it's hard to see how something like that wouldn't happen. I hate to say it out loud.
In 2020, it seemed like the challenges to the elections, even though the former president was talking about the fact that he thought the election could be stolen.
Yes.
But there was not a framework in place to effectively challenge it.
Right.
There is more of a framework today in 2024.
Yeah, there is, and he will turn to his allies and he will demand that they refuse to accept the results, and they challenge the results and go to court and challenge it in court. That part doesn't bother me. If he wants to have lawyers go to court and challenge the results and do recounts, we've lived through that in this country. That's fine, and especially in a close race, he's entitled to that, right? What worries me is the rhetoric of they're ending America, they're turning America into a banana republic, and they've stolen the election, and you shouldn't accept it, and you shouldn't stand for it. Because you say that kind of thing, and it evokes January 6th, and people do take the stuff into their own hands. And again, they look to Trump as the gospel, and they believe what he says, and they act on it, and that to me is really distressing. If he does lose, it'll be a great test for the current Republican Party, the rest of them. Trump will have lost twice in a row. He will be 78 going, he'll be 80 2026. What do they do? How much do they play along? How much do they, frankly, enable it? It'll be a fascinating reveal of who's who, because we know that a lot of them are faking it. A lot of them don't like Donald Trump. A lot of them are doing a sort of like crossed figure for the day that he's finally off the scene. It'll be a tell as to who wants him to leave, and part of that will hinge on the results, right? If she wins by 0.3, 0.2 in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, they're not going to have a choice. They're going to have to support Trump's push for a recall. If she wins more convincingly, I think some of them will show some independence.
Final question, and then we'll take audience questions. Yeah. What happens to the Republican Party if Donald Trump were to lose again? What happens to the Republican Party going forward?
It's a great question. I think, first of all, I come back to the margin. What's the margin of defeat? How many states did he lose? What was the popular vote? What was the electoral college count? What was the margin in each of the states that he lost that proved decisive in him losing the electoral college? I think all that matters. That's the immediate aftermath. The longer term aftermath, if you look at the history of the two parties in this country, what happens with parties is that they don't go back to being what they were before, but they tend to absorb the old elements and that want to stick around at least, and they mix those with the new elements, and you have a fusionism, and you have a creation of a sort of new hybrid type party. So my guess is if Trump loses 2 in a row, the party's not going to go back to being what it was under Bush, but I don't think it'll be a pure MAGA party either. I think you'll see an enterprising governor, senator, congressman, or maybe military figure or business person that we're not thinking of who will say, I extend an open hand to every type of Republican, no hyphens. I want you in the tent. You're all here. You're all part of our great party, and you're all welcome. And we shouldn't be anti-Trump. We should be post-Trump. We should be post-Trump. I think that'll be the needle, the thread that they try to sort of push the needle through, is we're going to create a party that includes everybody, that's not anti-Trump, that's going to be post-Trump, that's going to take the best elements of the MAGA movement and marry that to our great party. That'll be what they say rhetorically. The truth is, the success of whatever they come up with will hinge entirely on the moment in the country and how Democrats have governed, if she wins, right? The fact of the matter is most parties aren't rewarded for their policies or platform or agenda. They're rewarded because people get tired of the other party, right? I mean, that's the old story in American politics, is that people get tired of the folks in power and the pendulum swings back, in part because of the leaders of the party that have taken power, but also because people are just sick of the old party, you know?
And if she loses, will Democrats have to take a hard look at how they're running campaigns or who they're
I was talking
targeting?
to a colleague about that last night, a really smart guy named Dave Weigel, who some of you guys might know, is here in Wisconsin. And Dave and I were talking about just that topic. And I think the party will have a flight to safety. I think it'll be such a jarring existential blow to the Democratic Party. I think the instinct will be a flight to safety.
What do you mean by that?
Moderation, caution, center left on the rise. We can't be a lefty party. We have to go back to being a sort of center left party that embraces every American. We got to find somebody that can win and fix our problem with blue collar voters. We can't keep losing the FDR coalition of working class Americans that has doomed us now, and we got to get them back. Who can do that? Look, even if she wins, it'll be a narrow victory, I think. At least it'll be narrow in the sense of the Electoral College. A popular vote will be decisive. And the Senate probably flips the Republicans, and the House is on a knife's edge. Democrats have a lot to be concerned about. Take Trump out of the equation entirely. Democrats have a structural challenge. And the structural challenge is they are every 2 years losing more and more votes from working class Americans. And it's not just working class white guys at diners in Ohio, as the perception is. It's gotten worse. It now is across racial lines. The class realignment of American politics is not a fair fight, okay? It's not a fair fight. Yes, it has given Republicans challenges in the suburbs and given Democrats a new coalition of a lot of upper income people who used to be Republicans. But there's less folks in the country club than there are at Walmart. It's just a fact, right? It's a numbers game. And Democrats are going to pay the price because of the nature of the Senate. Every state gets 2 senators, is now structurally going to be a challenge for them if they can't win back non-college voters. The Electoral College is going to be a challenge for them if they can't win back non-college voters. The House, same thing, because the House is sorted in ways that Democrats, as the poli-sci folks in this room say, Democrats waste their votes. They're wasted votes. When Democrats all live in big cities and suburbs, and they're condensed in those places, their votes are effectively wasted for House purposes because there's too many of them in the same places, and they don't have the same political power as they would if they were scattered across the country. And so in all 3 of our federal arms of government, House, Senate, and the presidential, Democrats have a structural challenge going forward unless they find a way to win back voters that don't have college degrees. So they have a profound issue with blue-collar voters that they gotta fix. And if they don't, they're gonna have a hard time sustaining majorities in Congress and winning the White House.
Ready for some questions?
Let's do it.
All right, we're going to ask you, I'm going to see if I can look up there, raise your hand and speak loudly. I don't think we have a microphone up there, so if we can't hear the question, we'll repeat it for everybody. So I'll start right down here, and then I'll go up there.
Jay Rosen says,
Yeah.
2016.
Yeah.
That reporters do a better job of serving democracy by covering the stakes and not the race.
I've heard that phrase before. Yeah.
Do you think that so far, it seems to me that once Biden debated Trump, the covering of the stakes were sort of pushed aside. Do you think reporters have done a good job of covering the stakes in this cycle?
I sure do. And if you want to, here's the challenge. If you want to know the implications of how Trump would govern and what his rhetoric would lead to, there is no lack of coverage of that. It exists. It's easy to find. The challenge is this. The expectation that if only Americans knew what he was promising, they would hate it, I think is a misread of the American voter. What Jay Rosen wants to think is, you know, if only all those folks in La Crosse and Green Bay and Oshkosh, if they would just read Project 2025, and if the papers there would only cover that stuff better, and if only they knew the implications of how Trump would actually govern, the scales would fall from their eyes, they would see the light, and they would say, oh, I've seen the error of my ways. I'm now voting for a Democrat because Donald Trump's a threat to our democracy and it would be authoritarian. I'm sorry, that's not how it works. That's not how the electorate works. That's not how the information flow in the year 2024 works. People are partisan. They have tribal instincts, and they're not gonna believe that because they don't want to believe it because that's how they want to vote. And I just think that people like that want to tell themselves a story about the media being somehow complicit when there's actually much larger forces at work, which is a lot of the country is just conservative. There was that book that came out 20 years ago called What's the Matter with Kansas? And there was this guy named Thomas Frank, who was a liberal writer, and he grew up in Kansas, and he went back home, and he couldn't understand. He said, I don't understand. These working class folks in Kansas, they're voting against their economic interest. I can't grasp why they're doing this. They get capital gains tax cuts and carried interest and the estate tax. It doesn't do them any good. They're barely saving $10 a month, and they're living paycheck to paycheck. Okay, and then you think about, well, in the Trump era, all these voters on the Upper West Side of Manhattan or in the West Side of LA, the richest of the rich are living in Pacific Heights in San Francisco. They're voting overwhelmingly for the party that wants to raise their taxes. What's wrong with them? Why are they voting against their economic interest? Because as Bill Clinton told me a couple of days ago when I saw him in North Carolina, politics is more than just your pocketbook. And by the way, Bill Clinton ran on this, the economy's stupid. So for him to say that is no small thing. Culture drives a lot of this too. And so these voters can see what Trump wants to do, and he's going to sick the National Guard on Adam Schiff or whatever. And the voters you're talking about, or that I mentioned, they're going to deny that it's true, or they're going to rationalize it, or they'll find some way to reverse engineer where they want to be in the first place, which is voting for a Republican. And that's just not going to change.
Let me, I saw somebody.
That's a long answer. I'm sorry about
hand
that.
up.
But you triggered me, as the kids say. Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, let's go up there.
I need
and
a
then
trigger
we'll
warning
we'll
that
come
time.
back,
Yeah.
and then I want to make sure I get over there too. So let's go up top there. Thank you.
This might be redundant, actually, but I wanted to ask, so in my view, the Chevron and Trump rulings from the Supreme Court,
Yeah.
and this is in no way meant to lessen the import of the Dobbs decision.
Please.
But the Chevron and the Trump rulings are some of the most consequential rulings ever.
I
come out of
totally agree.
I just cannot, I mean, I feel like Thomas Frank because I'm from Kansas and a liberal. I'm serious, and I read that book when it came out, and I looked around, I was like, this man is absolutely right. But I cannot for the life of me understand why those two rulings are not all over the media. I mean, when we're talking about stakes,
Yeah.
the stakes of those, I mean, they're going to remake,
But do you understand, like, are you also equally mystified why rich liberals in Manhattan vote for Democrats? I mean, that's against their economic interest too, right? Like, why are they doing that? It's culture.
this is about economic interest. This is about the very structure of our federal bureaucracy.
No, I'm going back to the Thomas Frank question. Yeah. I guess my point on that is if people vote against their economic interest on both sides all the time because culture matters, and in some cases culture and identity trumps economics. I couldn't agree more that the role of the courts going forward and the role of the bureaucracy going forward is profoundly impacted by both of those decisions. I think that they got a lot of coverage in the elite media, and if you read the Journal, the Post, and the Times, you can learn a lot about the implications of those opinions. Is a Gannett-owned paper in rural Michigan or Washington State giving that equal coverage? No, they're not. And I think that goes to a larger challenge we have, which is elites know more about American government and politics than they ever have because they have access to so much damn information. And they pursue it and they pay for it. And we're creating a two-tiered system in American democracy in which we have a haves and a have-nots. And the haves, who will pay for information and read fantastic journalism and fantastic reporting, know a lot about what you just said, know a lot about those two opinions. And people who aren't paying for that, who are getting their Gannett paper in their community, I don't want to pick on Gannett, or like whatever, their corporate-owned paper that's being whittled to the bone in their community, or they're getting their information from Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter entirely, and they're getting an algorithm pushing them what they want to hear. They don't know anything about that stuff. I guess my answer to you is I think we have a bigger problem at hand than the lack of column inches devoted to those two opinions, right? The larger issue is that elites know about them, and they are getting plenty of coverage, but for a slice of the country, and the rest of the country doesn't know about them, and they don't know about them because they're not being told because those people aren't reading those publications, or they're getting information from social media entirely. That, to me, is a much larger structural issue than why didn't the Times do 2 more stories on the Chevron decision,
There was a question right here.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yep, it's you.
Thank you. So, you were talking about the future of the Republican Party.
Yeah.
And just a month ago, Liz Cheney in an interview said that that she believes Trump has damaged the reputation
Yes.
of the Republican Party so severely that there might any conservatives in America might need to start a third.
Yeah, I saw that.
In order to convince the American public
Yeah.
that to ever vote.
Yeah.
And I just want to know what you think of this opinion, and do you think that there might be
Room for a third party. Yeah. I thought there would be a more prominent third party candidate on the ballot this year, because I thought that the sort of grumpy old men 2 choice that we had at the start of the year, and folks, as you guys know, the sequel is never as good as the original movie, and a lot of Americans didn't like the original movie that much either. 70% of the country was saying, please, no, Uncle, we don't want the 2 guys yelling about their golf games. Which, by the way, it's just incredible to think that was a real thing that happened. Like the 2 moments in American life that are amazing. That, well, more than 2, but anyways, as Joe Biden would say, anyways. The fact those 2 guys were talking about their golf handicaps with the world watching, just what a country. There are structural, and I'm talking about structure so much tonight, there are structural challenges and impediments to creating a third-party movement in this country, never more so than in an era of high polarization, and here's why. Because a lot of Americans are driven by what's called negative partisanship. I can say that on a college campus, you guys know what that means. That's the driver. You're voting against the other guys more than you're voting for your side, to put it in layman's terms. And so when the animating force for many voters is your disdain or fear of the opposition, and you're voting on those grounds, then the worst thing in the world is to risk wasting your vote and unintentionally helping the guys that you really hate. And I think that's what stops more than anything these third-party candidates, because nobody wants to waste the vote. And if they don't have money, and that's the other impediment, money too, they don't have money to get known, people are like, well, why would I throw away a vote for somebody that's not going to win? And I could actually only help the party that I really hate by doing that. So the threat of being a spoiler, I think, is a huge challenge. That said, we're now at a moment in America where, because of our 2-party system, we effectively have a European-style multipolar, multi-party system under the banner of our 2 parties. And so you've got these uncomfortable marriages going on. in which like the Republican Party, like they're living under the same roof, but like they're not sharing the same bedroom anymore, and they're barely on speaking terms, right? They're making the best of it when the kids are home, and it's election season, and we got to have like a nice family dinner here. Let's not
Great analogy. Just keep going.
Let's
you know?
not throw dinner rolls. Let's not throw dinner rolls at each other. Let's get through the meal, and we'll have dessert, and then and when Tommy goes back to Madison, we can have a real conversation. Okay, good enough for you. Good.
Very
okay.
good. Yeah.
But it's an unsteady piece, right? It's a cold piece, and what keeps them together, whether it's Republicans or Democrats, is the same motivating factor. Okay, the Democrats are the not Trump party. Joe Biden was not President Biden. His name was President, not Donald Trump. Okay, and he never wanted to accept that, and he found out the hard way, thanks to Nancy Pelosi's blade, that he was a vehicle against Donald Trump. That's all that mattered. And once that vehicle was in the ditch, it turned out to be a jalopy, boy, they had no time for him anymore, did they, right? And that was cruel and really brutal, but that's politics today, and it's politics in an era where the parties are motivated by contempt for the opposition. So Democrats have a not Trump coalition. That's their adhesive. He's the best force for organization, mobilizing, fundraising, and unity. And he has been for almost a decade. The same adhesive force on the Republican side is the backlash against the perceived excesses of the left. You can say it, wokeism, whatever you want to say it. That's what keeps the Bush crowd in the same party with MAGA. They don't like the left. They hate the left. They fear the left. And therefore, they vote for Donald Trump, even though he's up there talking about a dead golfers. You know what? It's humiliating for them, a lot of them. They don't like it. It's embarrassing to go on TV and be asked those questions. But the alternative is voting for a party that you fundamentally disagree with. And so you're now in a place where you either suck it up and stay with one of those two parties, or you're politically homeless. I had coffee a couple of days ago with a lobbyist in Madison who was an old school Republican who worked on campaigns and just loathes Trump, views Trump as a vile and a threat to the country. He's not voting for Trump. And I said, okay, so you're going to vote for Kamala Harris? Said, oh, hell no, I'm not voting for Kamala. Although it was Madison, so he'd say hell no. He said, oh, no, I can't vote for her. I said, why not? He said, she's wrong on all the issues. Wrong on all the issues. I disagree with her on every policy issue. Where does he go? He has nowhere to go, right? He has nowhere to go.
Yeah. Let me, did I miss anybody?
I got to do some shorter answers here. Sorry, guys.
No. Anybody up there in that? We got students over there.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I wish there was more.
We've talked about the Supreme Court and the Chevron
Yeah.
decision.
Yeah.
And you've talked about what would probably happen in House and Senate races
Yeah.
if Trump wins.
Yes.
If Trump wins,
Here we go.
are there going to be any governors on something like Project 2025?
Yeah. So I can tell you this, and this has been reported, not to the extent that I think that it fully captures the scope of it, but Democratic governors are already having conversations in private about how to prepare for Trump's restoration because they're worried about both him denying them aid of all sorts, whether it's emergency aid or federal aid of any kind, but also him pursuing them and pursuing people in those states and trying to use DOJ to target them. They're already talking about practical issues like, for example, the abortion pill, whose name I'm going to mispronounce, and trying to stockpile that drug in case Trump tries to ban access to that drug. These are really serious implications. And talk about the stakes versus the horse race. Those are the stakes. They're having those conversations. And so, yeah, there's already talk among Democrats about what do we do? How do we get through the Trump years? And what does that look like? And yeah, it's a great question. What Republican governors or members of Congress show any independence? You know, if they have a 52-seat Senate majority, Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, who are not supporting Donald Trump, who are independent-leaning figures in their states, are going to play the role of Manchin and Sinema in the sense that they're going to be the swing votes. They're going to be decisive. Do they resist the pressure that Trump sends their way? To be complicit in all kinds of things that he wants to do. And frankly, and this is a longer conversation for a separate panel, but what does Trump go through with and what does he not go through with? I know we don't even want to think about it that way, but how much of this is bluster and how much of this is he actually going to pursue? All of us know the first time he was president, a lot of bad things didn't happen. The proverbial planes landed safely at National Airport because people walked up to his desk when he wasn't there and they took paper off the desk, all right? Or they slow walked demands or requests that he made until he forgot about them. Are those adults going to be back in the room when he's watching Fox and Friends at 8 in the morning, and he then says, "I want to do 120% tariff on French cheese, and do it by noon"? Do folks take that order, right? Or, but in more consequential terms, when he orders the rounding up of illegal migrants in this country and wants the National Guard to do it, do folks carry out those orders? That is the question. Does he do it in the first place, and are the orders followed? We have to, I mean, that's what we're looking at potentially. It's very sobering. There's no question about it.
I see a hand up there. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Trump's win in 2016 was a disaster for Republican parties in Wisconsin, Michigan, Georgia, other states.
Arizona, yeah.
What does that look like? We were talking about what happens if Trump wins to
Yeah.
the local Republican.
Yeah, great question.
Everybody hear that?
Look, Trump has been a gift for Democrats for 9 years from a strict electoral standpoint because they've created this coalition against him that has proven to be very powerful, right? It has won election after election, in part because the Trump imitators have found out there's only one original recipe, okay? And like, sorry, Carrie Lake, sorry, Mark Robinson, it doesn't work, you can't do it. Gravity still exists when your name is not Donald Trump. And so because of the lack of organization, too, and because of the rise of MAGA, these state parties, as you allude to, have been really weakened, and they've nominated candidates that are surefire losers in general elections. They've given away race after race because Trump imitators cannot win in the fall, in the general election. So your question is, what happens again? And no Democrat would be caught dead having this conversation out loud because if you're a Democrat, you can't dare find any silver lining in a Trump victory. But 2018 was a really good year for a lot of Democrats, governors and House members. I mean, look no further. J.B. Pritzker, Gretchen Whitmer, Tony Evers. Just that's in this neighborhood, right? Won in 2018. In part because of the Trump backlash. So yeah, if Trump does win 24, is 26 going to be a big Democratic year? And would he take steps to like not count votes or to somehow change the rules of the elections to stop that? There's definitely Democrats in red states where Democrats have really struggled who would never say it out loud, but are looking at the possibility of, well, you know what? I wasn't going to run for governor, but if Trump wins and maybe there's a really good year, we could win Iowa. We could win Florida. Who knows? So, yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit cavalier right now to have that conversation, and I know that Democrats would actually say it, but it's certainly a possibility that there could be a similar backlash in 26 that there was in 18, especially if he goes through with some of this stuff. Yeah.
Because I'm a journalist, I want to ask a follow-up question.
Well, isn't that brazen here?
What about the next 4 years under a Trump agenda? Like, do they really think it's going to solve inflation? It's going to fix all these problems in the country? In 4 years,
Who's the they?
do the Republicans think that 4 years of the Trump agenda is
Right.
going to save the country in a way convincing
Okay.
Americans? Are they going to
Well,
be more angry in 2020?
I think it depends on who are we talking about? We're talking about like the conventional pre-Trump Republican senator who is embarrassed by him. That person probably hopes that they can survive it and they keep a majority in the Senate and can get like normal, pro-market conservative policies through, and that Trump will bow to them and like not sick massive tariffs on various countries. The more MAGA crowd probably believes in the gospel of Trump and thinks like, yeah, those tariffs will do wonders for childcare, and like, yeah, we got some real folks in this room. I know we had some real junkies. Yeah, right. It just depends on who we're talking about, right? That like, yeah, like my massive tariff regime on all of our allies is going to give me the money to like subsidize childcare for every American family, right? I mean, are there folks that believe that? Like, yeah, there are. Are there a lot? No. Somebody else had a question. Yeah, right here in the front. Should we end with this?
No.
How would you personally
Yeah.
assess the Democrats' strategy towards like undecided and swing state voters who have been unhappy with the platform
On Gaza. Okay, great question. So, I thought the Jill Stein effect would have a little more traction here in Madison, in light of Gaza, in light of the Biden administration. And just talking to kids the last couple of days, I've been surprised. I don't hear the Stein thing at all. Is that fair to say, by the way? That the Stein thing is sort of the dog that's not barking here? I don't pick that up at all, which to me is good news for Harris, because again, this is a margins game. Her coalition's precarious. She can't afford Stein to get 1,000 votes out of Madison, or certainly not 2,000 votes out of Madison.
What if nobody votes?
Well,
What if those same people just
the
take
risk,
a pass?
Yeah, so the risk, so maybe they won't do Stein, but do they stay home, or do they skip the top line? That's the other risk that's harder to figure out, right? And this is the challenge of having this coalition of being anti-Trump, that when you actually win elections because of it, you then have to make choices, and governing is making choices. And when you make choices, you anger people because you got to take a side on an issue. And so, yeah, this administration is seen by a lot of folks on the left as being too complicit of the Netanyahu government and Israel, and they're facing a real challenge because of that. And if some kids stay home, or some folks on the left stay home because of that, that upends their coalition. It's a real challenge. And I think less here than in Michigan, but Michigan has become a bigger problem for Harris's campaign because of that issue. And Netanyahu knows American politics and wants to have Trump back. It gives him a free hand, or much more of a free hand. And he knows what he's doing. He understands that. And look, when this war went from Gaza to Lebanon, I think it's a seminal moment. And if she does not carry Michigan 2 weeks from tonight, I think it'll be in part because Netanyahu went into Lebanon, and when he did that, it became a much more personal and powerful issue in Michigan, because a lot of the Arab American community in Michigan is Christian, and not just Muslim, they're Christian from Lebanon, and they have friends and relatives who are still in Lebanon. It became much more tangible to them once it was not just Gaza, but it was Lebanon too. And I think it created more of a challenge for Harris, because it affected a wider swath of voters there. That's, I know, deep in the weeds for your question. I'm sorry about that. But we're talking about a race that's going to be decided by a few thousand votes in a few states, and those things matter. And that's why I think it'll be fascinating to watch what she does in the final weeks of the race. And we'll know that they're concerned about Michigan if she tries to create any separation between her and Biden on the Middle East, right? Hubert Humphrey, some of the older folks in this room will recall this, waited until October to break from President Johnson, from LBJ, on Vietnam. Now, Vietnam was a much bigger issue in '68, collectively, than Gaza is now in this country in 2024. But it's widely seen in American political history that he waited too long to break from the president on an unpopular war. And I think if Harris loses Michigan, there will be those who say she waited too long, or she never broke with Biden on funding the Israeli army and the military and this operation. And I think that I know that she's weighing that right now.
Time for one more question, if anybody has one, or we can wrap things up. Yeah.
I actually have a follow-up to that.
Please. Oh, the moderators, here we go. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm inventing and invoking.
Absolutely. This is not a democracy here, Katie. Exactly.
So I'm just really curious about, I'm very confused
Yes.
by your answer to that question.
Okay.
Because you noted that Netanyahu would favor a
Trump.
administration to give him more of a free
Yes.
hand, yet 90% of your answer was about this issue sticking to Harris.
Yes.
What? Explain that tension to me, because I fundamentally don't get it.
Because the folks who were up for grabs, with a small number of exceptions, the choice is not Trump or Harris. The choice is Harris, Stein, or skip the top line, because we're talking about Democratic voters. Now, some of them are so furious about Biden's handling of the issue that to prove a point, they'll vote for Trump. I think that's a pretty small number. If you're an Arab American Democrat and you live in Michigan, and you've heard what Trump has said, including like trying to create a Muslim ban when you ran for president for the first time, like Trump's not an option for you. So I think it matters more for Democrats, because the voters we're talking about, Trump isn't even on the issue. Their choice is three things. It's Stein, I guess four: Stein, West, skip the top line or Harris. So I think it's more relevant to the Democrats because the voters we're talking about are Democratic voters, or at least left-wing voters, right? And so Trump isn't an option for the bulk of them.
Wrap things up there?
Can I just say one final thing? And that's thank you to all of you guys for having me. It's been so fun to be here the last couple of days, and especially the students. Thanks for having me to your classes. I love getting to know you. I'm looking forward to seeing more of you this week. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I realized I was forgetful with one particular bit of thank you, and that is to our co-sponsors from the Elections Research Center and the expertise that they provide, including their leader is right here in the audience. So my apologies, Barry, on that front. But again, thank you so much, J Mart, and to Mike. This was a fascinating, although in no way reassuring, conversation. Thank you.
Facts.
Thanks
Thank
everyone
you all.
for coming.
Appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Nice job, man.